right, y'all. Let's get into it. We're going to continue our series on Father's Day. Hey, how you doing there, Rev? And want to continue to have this conversation that I think is important. Uh, some of you may know, some of you may not know, but uh, I am an advocate for Black males. Uh, and as such, I want to uh, share with you my learning experience as I expose myself to different research and literary work that I think is really important. How you doing there, Mr. Dent? Good to see you. I'm glad I'm coming through loud and clear. So, today we're going to get into, let me go ahead and pause that here. Dr. Tommy Curry, if you haven't read his work, I encourage you to do so. The Man Not is a fantastic book. But Dr. Tommy Curry exposes another link between slavery and Black feminism at Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks, who recently passed away a few years ago, is a Black feminist author that a lot of colleges and universities in their work subscribe to. And unfortunately, Dr. Tia Hassan Johnson is one of the very few, less than 5, professors throughout the country that focuses on Black male studies. And so our perspective is not often heard, but I wanted to get into that and share a little bit of it. It is an election year here locally. And as you hear all the time, that Black people are not a monolith, that we do have different interests and different concerns. Unfortunately, predominantly, the mainstream thought are very superficial things. Not to say that they're not important. What I mean by superficial is, what's the words I'm looking for? It's not superficial. That's not the correct word. Just more populist, if you will. And so the viewpoints of many Black males is not expressed at all. And so that is what I am here to do. If you want to check out that work, The Black Male Political Agenda by Dr. Tia Hassan Johnson, and over 10,000 members of the Brotherhood of the Onyx Report, you can check that out at www.tiahassanjohnson.com/BMPA. And that is a living document that can be added to in regards to Black male issues. So I want to go ahead and get into it. And while we are doing that, I will be making a chili today. So this is going to be also an episode of Cameron's Kitchen here. So I know it's a late lunch for the office, so I'm going to whip up a can. I'm going to whip up a pan of cornbread and make some chili for the office to consume. So let's go ahead and get into it. I will be cooking while we both listen to this exposition here.
Subscribe, join, and donate if you will. Support the channel so we can continue to bring you independent Black male thought and content. But it doesn't have to be filtered through corporate or politically correct means. Y'all know what it is. So last few days have been pretty crazy, pretty busy, and brothers have been sending me all kinds of stuff that it's just been interesting. Stories, articles, videos, you name it. All kinds of stuff has been dropping lately, especially in light of Father's Day. And I'm seeing Black men fighting for themselves, fighting for their presence in a way I've never seen before. And I salute it. Really do. But it's time to do what we got to do. We got to put this information out. We got to think about things and challenge convention in ways that we may never have prior. Right? So that said, these are some of the things. Let me show you. This is what some of the brothers have been sending me very recently. And they've been asking me about what this is all about. Right? So in the last few months alone, 2022 has been pretty unique. We had first in February, Black Her Story Month. Right? Unique event, kind of different. not the typical Black History Month we, are normally acquainted with. And that was quickly followed up with Women's History Month. And of course, in the midst of all of that, we also had Mother's Day, and we had Pride Month, which is fairly female leaning in the midst of it all, or at least feminine leaning. And then you had Juneteenth. And one of the things that was brought to my attention, and I had several brothers, some of whom are professors themselves, sending me picture after image after TV show after video, where you see this kind of solipsistic, self-referencing, right, of Black women by Black women, right? And of course, this is followed up by the infamous and now consistent argument every year about who Father's Day belongs to. And that's what a lot of this was sparked by. Appreciate the support, Uneducated. He says, I'm on the East Coast and not going to make it through this one just for the collection plate. Much appreciated. Yeah, I don't plan to go this late very often, but I did want to get one in today at the very least, even though it's running late. But I appreciate that support. So as you can see on the screen, these are just random. You can find these all over now. And brothers have been asking me what this is about. And, I've talked about this for years, kind of self-referencing, the kind of downplaying and diminishing of Black male presence, both in homes as well as in popular culture. And, in what we might call the imaginary, right? And so that being said, there's another angle to this that I thought really does contribute in a way to the downplaying of the Black male presence, and really has a link that takes us back to enslavement. Shout out to Dr. Tommy Curry. Dr. Tommy Curry posted this today. I thought it was, it needed to be said, right? Had to be acknowledged, had to be dealt with, because it was powerful. I posted this on his Facebook page. He said, finally found a reference to free Black men being a danger to women and children and beating women after slavery, which was mentioned by Bell Hooks and We Real Cool. Bell Hooks asserts, with no citation or reference, that Black men beat their wives in barns after emancipation. In 1857, Samuel Cartwright wanted to justify the institution of slavery. To do this, he argued that freeing Black men would lead to the abuse of women. This is where Bell Hooks is getting this nonsense from a pro-slavery ethnologist. The ethnology of the Negro or Prognathes race, New Orleans Academy of Sciences, 1857. Let me bring it up because I thought I had it here, but apparently I had not put it on screen yet. So let me go ahead and pull it up. Bear with me for a moment. I hate making you guys wait. And it's so crazy today. So everything is taking longer than I had planned. So anyway, but this is an incredible post, most particularly because of what it highlights. So let me see if I can go ahead and share my screen here. There we go. And enlarge this a little bit. So this is a page, not as large as it gets right here, but I will read the section of relevance. So this is a page that comes from Ethnology of the Negro, or Prognathes Race. And the point of contention, I'll start right here with his reference. And this is Samuel Cartwright. And I'll talk a little bit about him in a minute, but I want to at least foreground what Dr. Curry laid out before we go into it. So when he's talking about the Nigretians, he's talking about Nigerians. He says, or Africans proper, not only enslaved their wives, but paved their courtyards with the skulls of the refractory or disobedient. Wealth and power acquired by the husband so far from elevating the wives add to their degradation by being used to increase their number. King of Dahomey, according to the most authentic accounts, has 3,333 living wives, besides a vast number whom he has capriciously murdered. Nor does what is called Negro freedom elevate the colored woman, but sinks them lower. The husbands hold them in abject slavery. They dare not kill them, as in Africa, but they but they beat and maltreat them in the cellars of New York and other places in the northern states, which they dare not do in the South. Freedom of the husband is a loss to the women and children. They are in slavery still and have lost their white protectors. That's interesting. So Samuel Cartwright here is talking about women and children being slaves to black men without white protectors. Those white protectors, of course, being slave owners themselves. Now, what Dr. Curry does is he relates this to this piece here from We Real Cool by Bell Hooks. And I apologize, I can't make it any larger for some reason, but it is what it is. But she says on page 4, and it was within this notion of patriarchy that educated black men coming from slavery into freedom sought to mimic. However, a large majority of black men took as their standard the dominator model set by white masters. When slavery ended, these black men often used violence to dominate black women, which was a repetition of the strategies of control white slave masters used. Some newly freed black men would take their wives to the barn to beat them as the white owner had done. Clearly, by the time slavery ended, patriarchal masculinity had become an accepted ideal for most black men, an ideal that would be reinforced by 20th century norms. Now, a couple things to clarify here. You need to pick up the Man Not. You definitely need to pick up Tommy Curry's Man Not, because that is, that really provides the framework for a lot of this language. But one of the arguments that he deals with in the Man Not is this question, this assumption, this accusation, most particularly by feminists, that black men seek to emulate white men, and thus, as Bell Hooks is talking about here, want to live out a white patriarchal fantasy of domination, exploitation, and patriarchal control. Right? This is the accusation that's been levied at black men for quite some time. But what Dr. Curry has figured out is that those accusations are actually based on earlier white ethnologists like Samuel Cartwright, who fabricated arguments with no evidence or empirical basis, right? These are the kind of arguments that they pose to frame black men. Now, this would happen again in the 1960s and 70s. Dr. Curry also did some work there pointing out and naming the very specific black feminists that actually appropriated what he called subcultural violence theory, or what's called subcultural violence theory, which is in turn an updated version of Samuel Cartwright's work, where you have white ethnologists fabricating arguments, I should say, about black men without using data, and black feminists in turn appropriating that information and arguing it as fact. And this has had an impact on us culturally in the black community, especially among the educated white tower elite, because one of the things it's done is pushed for a very particular approach to black men that black feminists have championed. But what many of them have overlooked is what Dr. Curry has proven empirically, that is that these arguments are baseless, and they actually come as an attack to black men. It's an attack of black men using information that is inaccurate and has racist origins. And he just found another example of that today. So y'all know I'm a supporter of Dr. Curry's work, founder of Black Male Studies. So this is the kind of thing that scholars in the field have been framing and putting into context for quite a while. So shout out to Dr. Curry. Right? Important work that we tend to overlook in many ways, or it doesn't get the publicity it should, because in many ways it frames a relationship that we still have in the black community on many fronts. Shout out to Brandon, says Dr. Curry is Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson of Black Male Studies. Oh, he called me a LeBron. Okay, that's interesting. Rich Turner, appreciate that support on the wood for greater good. Appreciate that. Shout out to Ghetto User, always try to support. Much appreciated, But just to also put into context who some of the figures are we're talking about. This is, if you're unfamiliar, Bell Hooks, who passed away a while ago, but is known as one of the late 20th century's most prominent black feminists. She's probably the most, one of the most well-known, if not the most. And this is a quote from her book, Yearning, Race, Gender, and Cultural Politics, where she talked about the Central Park Five, right? And so in that, she says, no one can truly believe that the young black males involved in the Central Park incident were not engaged in the suicidal ritual enactment of a dangerous masculinity that will ultimately threaten their lives, their well-being. One reads again Michael Dyson's piece, The Plight of Black Men, focusing especially on the part where he describes the reason many young black men form gangs, the sense of absolute belonging and unsurpassed love. It is easy to understand why young black males are despairing and nihilistic. And it is rather naive to think that if they do not value their own lives, they will value the lives of others. Is it really so difficult for folks to see the connection between the constant pornographic glorification of male violence against women that is represented, enacted, and condoned daily in the culture and these Central Park crimes? And we all know that it was later revealed that those men were innocent. Many of them went to jail on grounds that they never should have, right? But this is coming from a prominent black feminist at the time who was talking about black men and Central Park 5 accusations as not only truth, but truth that was reflective of black masculinity as a whole, meaning that even if the Central Park 5 were guilty, they are a small representation of black manhood in general, right? And even though a lot of people today may not even know about, Bell Hooks' specific arguments, or Michelle Wallace, or Nsaki Shange, or, you can name the list of them, the arguments have snowballed. And they've been appropriated, picked up, and internalized, even by younger scholars. And this is something I noticed at the university level, who don't know these works in particular, but have inherited the anger and rage at black men. But when you get to the source, when you get to the earliest stage of that snowball, what Dr. Curry is highlighting is that it actually began with a lie. It began with a lie written by white ethnologists, whether it was in the late 19th century or in the mid 20th century, neither of which was proved with any empirical data. And yet it's taken hold on the perception of black men. Now, in terms of Samuel Cartwright, who Dr. Curry is pointing out is the foundation of, this particular argument about black men after slavery wanting to beat their wives and emulate white slave owners. You got to keep in mind, Samuel Cartwright, 1793 to 1863, was the founder of the concept, or the developer of the concept of drapetomania, right? The desire to escape slavery or mental disorder akin to madness, right? For those who fought against slavery, right? So he framed the fight against slavery as a mental illness, right? These were the kinds of works in place. Again, no real empirical research. These are assertions by slave-owning white men in positions of authority. Shout out to Jay Will. He says, you let them speak long enough, they sound exactly like white supremacists. They subtly started their own version of the Great Replacement theory with their policing of our dating choices. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the reason they sound like white supremacists is because they're actually using white supremacist talking points. They're lifting them wholesale from publications. And of course, now that we have social media, from social media as well, right? So Cartwright argued that the cure for drapetomania and slaves was to treat them like children with care, kindness, and humanity to prevent and cure them from running away, and offer frequent whippings. Cartwright also described another disorder, dysphasia aethiopica, called by overseers rascality, was a disease affecting both mind and body that explained the apparent lack of work ethic among slaves. Right? So this is who Bell Hooks is pulling from when they start to talk about these arguments about where black men must get this urge to dominate, exploit, and beat women. And you'll hear this even to this day. I had a brother reach out to me just yesterday. Well, I get about 100 messages a day at this point. And shout out to those that send those. I really do appreciate it. But if you're going to send me videos, you got to tell me why you're sending it to me. Sometimes you guys will send me 3-hour videos, and I'm like, dude, you give me a timestamp. Tell me why you want me to watch this. I would appreciate it because I don't always have a lot of time. But I do want to let you know I appreciate that support and your willingness to send me that information. Nevertheless, when it comes to something like this, to understand what's actually being pulled and why and where. Like, as I was saying, one of the brothers sent me some of the internal arguments to some of these feminist Facebook pages, right, that are closed. And he managed to be in one. And he talked about the assumptions and the arguments made about black men murdering black women en masse, right? These kinds of assumptions, these kinds of baseless accusations. When you really get down to it, even when you're talking about intimate partner homicide, really talking about a few hundred per year, men and women. The numbers are not that far off. But as a good sociologist friend of mine told me, well, let me close these pages. I like to hit me with messages in the middle of the show. Anyway, even in the midst of these various arguments, crap. All right, lost my train of thought. Anyway, but what I was saying is, as far as some of these feminist arguments, as far as intimate partner homicide, that, as a good sociologist friend told me, you got a better chance of being struck by lightning than you do being killed by an intimate partner. You really do. And that's fairly across race. It's really not. It's not an epidemic the way it's trying to be made. And black men in many circles are being made the face of it, but that's not the reality. Reality is, in the black community, abuse is fairly bidirectional, and homicide is not as widespread. You, like I said, you're dealing with a couple hundred people a year out of 43 million, really. But this is the depiction. This is the political angle of this that's been used by feminists against black men for decades. And this argument really, some of these arguments go back to the 19th century and need to be put in proper context. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that. And shout out to Dr. Curry for this brilliant assessment, because in many ways, going back to the beginning of what I was talking about, when we get to this here, this unabashed self-celebration, this unabashed downplaying of the black male presence in family, the black male presence in relationships, a lot of it is rooted in very old ideas that come from lies or unsubstantiated arguments that are designed to malign the imagery and memory of black men. And it's continued to be used even by established news organizations, academic enterprises. This is a constant in terms of how black men are perceived. And it remains such. And it's time black men start speaking out. But the problem has been, more so than anything, we haven't had the platform to do it. So actually taking what we're doing and applying it, on a wider scale is imperative. Right? Pushing back against these narratives when we hear them. Narratives that we, for years, just used to take and quietly accept, especially when they came from people that we trusted. Any of you that have sat in university classes and developed relationships with some of these, feminist scholars that were, often considered almost mother figures to some. It's hard to actually accept that the material that they're actually referencing is highly problematic. It can be hard to accept that. But when you actually look at the data, and this is why I think the, kind of intellectual revolution that Dr. Curry, myself, Green Gorilla, Dr. Ronald Neal, and a number of others are trying to push, is to really use evidence to situate and historically contextualize where these arguments are coming from. And actually look at the ways they impact black folks. Shout out to Dr. Thunder. He as well is part of that enterprise. Right? What's up, Rodney? What's going on? Right? This push to make sense of black reality beyond assumption, beyond just baseless accusation. And it really helps us to understand this right here. Right? This entitlement. This lone woman narrative where black men becomes these monstrous beings that they have to survive. And the very idea that black men can find themselves in a vulnerable position, unthinkable. We have to get to the reality of what black men are living. And that's one of the reasons I appreciate you all in the comments, most especially, because one of the things I know that y'all will do is you'll start telling stories about the things you've experienced. And I think it's important, it's imperative that those stories be told, those stories be written, those stories be published, whatever means you have of telling your story and providing evidence for it. So you guys know who watched my channel in the last few months, I've interviewed black men who've gone through, intimate partner violence in their relationships, and I support the push to have that video evidence made public and definitely used in court cases. Because without it, the popular narratives that people like Samuel Cartwright were happy to proffer about black men take hold. Whether you're talking about juries, judges, lawyers, they have no problem seeing black men as monsters. That image has been constructed over generations. So to actually have black men pushing back with evidence about how they're treated, imperative. And just like Amber Heard with Johnny Depp, what did she tell him? Nobody's going to believe you. There are plenty of people that take advantage of the idea that black men are monsters and victimize and harm black men on the basis that nobody will believe that they actually weren't monsters that didn't initiate violence. It's time we push back against these narratives. It's time we challenge them with information and accurate data. Because this shit has been going way too long. Way too long. It needs to change. And this is one of the reasons I salute y'all, because the brothers that I see in here will email me about debates that they're having in other circles, whether it's in families, whether it's online, whether it's at the job, whether it's in classes. I got grad students reaching out to me trying to find out how they can actually begin to get more publications and they themselves publish material in line with Black men's experiences. We're experiencing a renaissance of sorts of Black men, and people are hating to hear it. People are literally frustrated about having to listen to Black men. And it's interesting to see, right? Let me see. I'm never really clear on what I can actually show without getting my videos taken down. Let me see if I
There's
can
going to be some
play a
curse
little bit
words
of
coming up
this.
here. So just so you know.
Somebody sent me this earlier today. The video by a young Caucasian male who, let's see, you know what I'll do? Show it on screen this way. So you can kind of see him here. There's a YouTube video. All right. And so, let's see, I'll play him a little bit. So you can hear, I'm not going to play the whole thing because his voice is frankly annoying, but I want you to hear the level of frustration. And I'll tell you why this is relevant in a moment, but here we go. Okay, hold on. Y'all know how it is. Too many things going on all at once. Let me get the sound right so you can hear it. So it starts with a clip. That's actually a clip from another show. And then he responds to it. All right, I get it. I promise. I got it the first time, I got it the second time, I got it the third time. How many goddamn podcasts do we need? Some man coming up in here and telling you what he likes to suck and what he likes to fuck. Completely unprovoked. Nobody asked. I just see these goddamn videos on my For You page. Every time I press not interested, I scroll away. I press not interested. I scroll away. You come back for more. You won't leave me the fuck alive. I'm sick and tired. The women you're talking about are tired. The women you're not talking about are tired. The men in the back are tired. Shit, the non-binary people are asleep. We all want to go home and you will not fucking let us. It is June 2022 and we are still doing this shit. What is it that you need exactly? What do I have to do for you to leave me alone? Was it me? Did I come up to you with a Glock and tell you to go put your penis in that single mother over there or else I'm going to shoot? I don't recall doing that at any point. You don't want to sleep with these women? No. Like, what do you want me to tell you? Do you want me to So, basically, this was a post sent to me on Facebook by this Caucasian dude, skinny dude, who's talking about how frustrated he is about listening to all these videos about Black women and Black men's dating and mating choices. But the reason I play this is because it was a Black woman on Facebook that posted it, and the title of it, as she put it, was "We Are All Tired," right? With a whole bunch of emojis, right? And so what I said is, I'm not quite sure what this white dude has to do with the issue, but y'all think you're tired of Black men stating their preferences in the last year, as if we've always done that? Trust me, that's a new thing. I said, if you're tired, then imagine how tired we are of 40 years of talk shows, magazine articles, TV shows, movies, so-called academic papers and presentations, highlighting everything from slanderous myths about absent Black fathers to Black men needing to make six figures and be in perfect shape to even be worthy of being considered for dates. You've had 1 year of a small percentage of brothers in social media saying this, but we've endured 40 in the mainstream. Please stop it, right? But my point in bringing up all of that is that you're starting to hear people frustrated with having to hear Black men for the first time, and they are just as frustrated at hearing these new dating arguments that Black men are making as they are hearing Dr. Tommy Curry and Dr. T. Hassan Johnson talking about Black male studies, whether we're talking about it in the academy or on social media. The same frustration is at the base of it. They don't want to hear it. And why don't they want to hear it? Because Black men have been traditionally silent. We've accepted their criticisms. We've literally consumed their bile for decades in silence. And after getting a little bit of pushback, there's already a problem because they're not used to it. I keep telling people, even Kevin Samuels, as much as they hate him, what is it, 2 years? 2 years on YouTube. As if he's had some career as extensive as Oprah's. This is what we're looking at. And black men are finally starting to speak up. And here's the thing, it's not a question of what I agree with or don't agree with. For me, it's a question of black men having the right to do so, not just the legal right, but the actual right within the community to voice what they've been silenced from voicing for generations. Shamed into silence, told to be quiet, told to accept criticisms about them with no response. And not only told to do so by parental figures, authority figures in families, but even authority figures in university classrooms, telling us what our humanity is and isn't, while basing their arguments in very old data that has nothing to do with anything historically accurate. And we've accepted it, mostly in silence. I can't tell you how many black male scholars reach out to me to thank me for my work and tell me what they agree with and send me additional information, but they themselves can't say anything publicly for fear of losing their careers. Not their jobs, losing their careers. So at the end of the day, we need to keep this pushing for the sake of truth, not for the sake of rage, not for the sake of revenge, but for the sake of accuracy, for the sake of the voiceless generations of black men that had to take this shit in silence and be quiet. So we got to speak up for our sons so that they don't have to inherit this unnecessary silence. Shout out to Jay Will, because then their stepdaddy insurance policy is being ripped to shreds. It wasn't a problem until we started taking inventory of our lives. Indeed. I grew up in the era of the stepfather. I don't know if you meant it this way, but I grew up in the era of where there was almost an expectation that black men be stepfathers. The first time in my life I ever heard a man say, I don't necessarily want to be with a woman with kids, was like, a handful of years ago, maybe 6, 7 years ago. I never heard that before. And it's not about liking it or disliking it, agreeing or disagreeing. It's about the fact that we were shamed into not being able to even say it. And so I'm liking the fact that there's this renaissance of black male voice. And I think it's past due. Shout out to Prince Donnie for the support. All right, he says the Black Women Trans Alliance is becoming more obvious. These kind of things are. Black men calling it out on a variety of levels, coming from a variety of different ideological positions, different class positions. All of it is important. Black male voices need to be heard on a wide variety of topics because it really hasn't been. We've been told what our opinions are. And others have used black women, most particularly, to speak on our behalf, especially when it comes to electoral politics. And black men are starting to question their options in a variety of different contexts. And again, I'm for the right for black men to do so. So I appreciate y'all. I'm not going to hold you too long. I do apologize for going this late. I'll try and keep it earlier. But that's what we're dealing with. So shout out to Dr. Tommy Curry. Shout out to all of y'all who support Black Male Studies, who support the Manosphere, who support the Onyx Report. Appreciate you. Make sure you comment so I can check out what you guys are thinking. And please continue to send me information, send me stories, so on and so forth. If you think it's important, you think it's something we need to deal with, I'm happy to get it. Just make sure, again, if you're sending video, that's time consuming. So give me a timestamp and let me know what in it you want me to see. But it's much appreciated. Keep speaking up. Keep pushing back. Peace.
All right, that is Dr. Tiasan Johnson. I'll go ahead and put his YouTube there in the chat. Interesting enough, we let me tell it backwards. So this year was my first year participating in Juneteenth, and not merely attending Juneteenth, but actually participating in the planning and the execution of Juneteenth. And we had other folks that were participating in Juneteenth that were not Black. And one of the things that you would hear many of them say is, maybe I shouldn't be heading this particular thing, or, I shouldn't give my opinion in this space. I need to defer to the Black folks in this regard, right? Which is understandable and appreciated. Now, at the same time, I've got to ask the question. We work with intersectionality all the time, and that can be a very slippery slope, as you hear Dr. Tiesan Johnson talking about flat blackness, which is a concept in the context that he uses it in, is where you'll hear it police brutality, homelessness, uh, prison rates. These things particularly affect Black men, right? In larger numbers than women or folks from the LGBT community. So that stat is stated, and then it is then used to say, hey, all these resources and changes need to be done, and it needs to go to these groups, right? Just kind of like the civil rights movement, where King and others fought for civil rights, and then the people that really benefited from civil rights more than any other group were white women. And so you have this same phenomenon that's going on now, and we would understandably say, well, hey, almost in unison, right? I mean, a white cis male should not be telling Black folks and telling them whatever and giving them their opinions, right? So then, how is it that someone from the LGBT community all of a sudden switches into a protected class and then somehow feels that they can give their opinion and tell Black people, particularly Black men, what they should or should not do and how they're right or wrong? But somehow we are not able to call that out for whatever reason. So it's time to have those hard discussions and not be fearful of, as Dr. Tiesan Curry was saying, right? The person wasn't worried about losing their job, they're worried about losing their careers, right? And so they can't speak out, they have to remain silent. And so the more we go along to get along, because we're trying to take care of ourselves, we're trying to take care of our families, right? It just keeps moving further and further and further and further. And this is why we see ourselves in the state that we are in now, where we are not regarded in a positive light, but instead, if you're talking about the Black male, it's all negative. What are the positives? Either we need to be held accountable for our actions and we need to do better. We brought it on ourselves. We're woeful, inept, and all the negative things that go with it. It's one of the reasons why I hate the terminology of BIPOC, because the mainstream media, Black organizations, and other organizations use that, state that, and then go to advocate for their own particular groups. So again, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. So the next time you listen to someone speak about issues, the next time you read an article about an issue and you hear, look, watch, listen for Black people are affected this way, Black men are affected this way, and then watch it switch to either flat blackness or watch it switch into other groups. And so it's this bait and switch that happens in real time while the stats are there. But if you are stating that there is an issue that needs to be resolved and you're using blackness or Black males as that issue, police brutality, incarceration, whatever the case may be, homelessness. I've shared those stats ad nauseum with you. Then it switches to Black women or LGBT or some other group. How does that make sense if the majority is then all of a sudden pushed to the side? But they use that stat to lay the foundation, the scaffolding, the groundwork to make the argument on why these resources or why this policy or why this needs to change and this needs to happen. And so we've gone along to get along for a very long time. and having conversations with many fathers over Father's Day, over this weekend, and feeling even more marginalized than they have in many other years. They have felt marginalized in previous years also. It is up to the few of us, the Dr. T.S.on Johnsons. When I say few, he's 10,000 strong for the black male agenda. And there are pockets of men that are doing these things throughout the country. And that's why I say the few of us to swim upstream. It's one of the reasons why the conduit exists in the first place, right? To elevate voices of the voiceless, to cut through the mainstream media, the conversation that's being pushed out, to accept what we're told or what we're given and not to critique. And to critique means to dismantle the movement or whatever the goal is that we're trying to work toward. And so we're just a bunch of lemmings that are just marching off the cliff. So I hope that was informative for you. I'm going to play one more. As you can see, I've got the cornbread in the oven. That's cooking. I put it in the pan. My Corningware pan is at G2, my big one. And so I had to use a foil pan. And so I thought 2 boxes would be enough. And it barely coated the bottom. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to have to do 4 boxes, which made me smile because, we were just talking about my dad this morning and loving to cook. And, here I am in the middle of the day cranking out this cornbread and chili. So as you can see, this is a vegan chili. You saw all the nice healthy ingredients that I put in there and the chili powder. This thing might be a little spicy for me, but I'm sure everybody else will appreciate it. But it's also an exercise in using what's in your home, right? A lot of times we'll say, we're so very blessed, we don't realize how much food we actually have in our house, right? We have all these random cans and bags and boxes of food, and you continue to go shopping and buy something else, right? Because you don't have a taste for that, or you don't even remember, you don't even see it anymore. It's like a bulletin on the bulletin board, right? Once it's been on there for a few weeks, you walk past it, you don't even recognize it anymore. So it's like, you know what? I bet I can make something out of what I have here. I've got a ton of food in here. You know what you're gonna do? You're gonna make something in here. So that's how the chili came about. I had everything. The only thing I was really missing was diced tomatoes. But for me, the salsa will kind of take the place of that. Uh, yeah, I think that's really pretty much it. I wish I had some black beans also. I really love black beans. The more beans that I can put into it, the more volume I can add. I was thinking about making a pot of rice just because you gotta send, you gotta send some for me and the wife. Yeah, I might put some rice in there just to kind of volumize it a little bit so it'll stretch. That's a good easy way to do it, so that it will feed more people. So you put the little rice in the bowl, then you take a couple scoops of the chili and pile it on top, and then you've got your cornbread. I mean, it's pretty starchy, but you know what? You're gonna sleep good after you eat that. Um, so yeah, you know what? I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna put on some jasmine rice and I'm gonna play the next video. I think that's a good idea. Because see, now the Rev talking about the wife needs some and he needs some. So now the church gotta get some and G2 gotta get some. So let me go ahead and make that rice and make that happen. But I love frozen vegetables. Okay, I did cut up a whole onion. I had a bag of frozen chopped onions, which is my go-to, but I didn't have enough onions, and I love onions, so I wanted to cut up an entire onion. You saw that I had the garlic clove there, and I like it's about $6 or $7 for the big diced garlic that's already set. It lasts several months, probably like a year. And so it just speeds up the process for me. You saw that I had the frozen bag of peppers, yellow, red, and green. And I just kind of chopped those up a little finer. They're still pretty chunky, but they come as strips. And again, it saves a lot of time. And then for someone who doesn't like cooking or doesn't have a lot of time to cook, both of those things are true, not mutually exclusive. It just helps because sometimes my peppers will go bad because it's like, okay, I went to the grocery store on Monday and I was going to cook tonight or cook tomorrow, and then it's Friday, and whatever, it's just not looking good anymore. So this is a way to keep those things fresh until you can use them. But people do love their fresh veggies as much as possible. So let me go in that kitchen and stir that really quick, and then I'll go ahead and play that next video. It smells delicious, let me tell you. I'm loving it. Oh yeah, we got that nice little simmer now. Let that cook. All right. Now that I've given it a little stir, I'll go back in the kitchen and make that jasmine rice. But go ahead and let me get this next video going here. Sorry about that. All right, so this next one is some mental health issues in boys are linked to the absence of their fathers. Again, this is our Father's Day gift series. And these things are important because, again, these conversations aren't typically had. We don't know. There's not, as I was saying before, in regards to black male studies, right? Looking through things through the lens of the black male, not through a feminist perspective or through the dominant society perspective. It is important that this is that I expose as many people as possible to this information, right? Not just black men and black boys, but to black women and other folks also, right? That there are other ideas. When you think about perspective, imagine yourself sitting at a table and write a number 6 really large in front of you. So while you're sitting there, you see the number 6. If someone sits across from you, they see the number 9. So who's right and who's wrong? Well, technically, you're both right. It just depends on your perspective. And so, as Dr. Tieson Johnson was sharing, for decades, right? One, the story is told by the victors. And then two, the studies that have been happening have been through the lens of feminism. And so our perspective, how we are regarded, why we are the way we are, why we do the things we do, why we think the way we think, why we're in the situations that we're in, is through that lens. And so we need another lens to which to analyze ourselves in, right? And so I hope you find this helpful. So again, this is some mental health issues in boys are linked to the absence of their fathers. So let's go ahead and get into that. We saw the documentary Since You've Been Down. How you doing, Christina? With youth, have you shared more on Kamonte Carter? No, I have not. Let me pop that in there. Kamonte Carter was the founder of Teach. So let me tell you why I have not. And again, this is one of those situations that I'm talking about, Christina. Now, Kamonte Carter's situation is valid and needs to be talked about. However, every black man, every black boy has not gone through the criminal justice system. And some that have deserve the sentence that they received, right? They committed a crime and they need to do the time. And some of the sentencing that they've received has been fair. But that's not all that we are. And so I think that it's imperative for us to not just tell the stories of a black man in regards to we're imprisoned and we've been victimized by the criminal justice system or by law enforcement. When you have educated black men out there, when you have black men and boys who have either graduated high school and just took a job in their local town like Bremerton, and they're just existing and they're surviving. They're not breaking any laws, they're not selling any drugs, they're not caught up in gangs, they're just merely existing and living their lives. And so while this is an important story to share, that is only a sliver of who we are as black men. And again, that's being told through the lens of Dr. Jewel. I don't want to get her name wrong. And, Akuye is promoting that. And that is important. But that is just one segment of the conversation that we need to have. And so that's what I mean by, having the perspective um, shared by different people in the black male community. Because while I can empathize and sympathize, I can't fully relate to Kamante Cowder's situation. And many black males and men can. Like my daughter is as I was saying yesterday, is a middle class, maybe a low upper middle class child in Kitsap County. So this isn't going to be her experience. So there's no relation there. Many of the boys and girls in our gyms are exceptional students already. That's not going to be their situation. But moving through society as black boys and girls, particularly black males, which is my focus, is important. That is analyzed through the lens of not just criminality or a victimization of being criminalized. So I hope that helps. All right, let's get into this one. Oh, and I apologize if you've been watching. If you've been watching the news, there has been reports of a lot of cyber attacks. So please be wary of your accounts. Don't click on things. Understand that banks and other institutions won't send you weird requests when they want you to log in and send your password. Be careful of you getting a phone call and they want you to give their information over. I've been attacked on all my bank accounts, G2's email account, and you can see it here as these things pop up. So I'll try to knock them down as fast as possible. But this was in the news that these things were kind of happening right now. So keep your guard up. Do change your passwords. Make sure that they're not simple. Don't make your password. uh, do try to make it a little bit more complicated there. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Let me get back in the kitchen for my chili burn.
This is ridiculous. What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Honest Report, Black Masculine News for the day. Hope all is well with you. Y'all know what it is. Getting it in for another day. Anything that we produce here might be of use to you here at the Honest Report. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate to support the channel so we can keep this going. And continue to bring you independently created black male content that does not bend the knee to anybody whose sensibilities are offended when black men open their mouths. Anyway, y'all see the title. Some mental health issues in boys are linked to the absence of their fathers. I always find it interesting when they act like this is a new discovery, when they slowly figure out fathers have importance, especially when it comes to their boys. It's ridiculous. Anyway, let's get into it. So, as you can see here, this is an article you can find on Center Formal. Center for Male Psychology.com. There it is. And some mental health issues in boys are linked to the absence of their fathers. Right, dated May 18th. And so it reads, the main reasons the boys were referred to me as psychotherapists were a diagnosis of ADHD with a strap line that nurture had been strongly implicated in causation. B, self-harm, where the referrer had since a vaguely seen a family issue as part of the causation. And C, predatory sexual behavior recognized as similarly reactive. I discovered that the absence of the father was implicated throughout each of these types of referral. Father's role in so-called conventional families is to support the mother by helping her calibrate her approach to the baby and throughout infancy and childhood. It's also to be different or to be a different parent to the mother so that the baby/child recognizes difference. This recognition is the beginning of learning that carries on through all situations in life. Now that's going to become a little bit more important as we go on. When you see that the variety of personalities between mother and father provide options for kids. most particularly sons in this instance. Right? This recognition is the beginning of learning that carries on through all situations in life. My case notes revealed that the absence of the father had allowed for an overly close relationship between mother and son. Sound familiar? Further, nearly all the children I saw could be said to be underachieving at school because of a disinterest through failure to recognize an inability to learn. Experiencing difference in early infancy acts like a blueprint for apprehending new phenomena through life. By definition, new situations bring difference because they are new and different. Similarly, so too does new information like that constantly available at school. An early appreciation of difference is therefore a strength factor for learning in life in the classroom. Now, see, this is interesting. It's going into more detail about the value of having difference. In the Black community, majority of our families are single mother led, right? We end up in a situation where we don't have as much difference when it comes to parental leaders, right? Authority figures in the household. And children, therefore, are impacted by the lack of difference and imprinted, if you will, as far as that's concerned, right? So let me see. I want to spend a few minutes outlining the absent father's role in three main referral types mentioned above. In terms of ADHD, psychosocial and emotional problems of children diagnosed with ADHD are discussed by various authors, for example, regarding how such children find relationships with family, friends, and peers very difficult because they appear to find self-regulation problematic. There may be a lack of regulatory control that children usually have over their minds, emphasizing their difficulties with their executive functioning in the classroom. They cannot calibrate themselves in relation to the tasks they are required to perform. They cannot calibrate themselves. That's interesting. Let's continue. Calibration and regulation is an essential part of the father's role. Bam. Bam. That's incredibly important. Otherwise, you have one parent operating in an unchecked fashion. And this is something that we, dramatically downplay when it comes to the role it plays in rearing children. And that's something we have got to be able to speak to much differently than we tend to. Hold on, I want to make sure I shout the brother out properly. Shout out to Cedric, sent me an interesting post talking about an associate that he's familiar with, a woman who has had a child or a man. I believe she is the sixth baby mama in his list. I think he has over 10 children. And she went into this knowing that he had this dynamic, had this many kids. And one of the things he and I talked about were the ways in which some women, because it's usually framed in terms of how men manipulate women, but nobody talks about when women walk into these dynamics willingly. And so he was asking me about why this takes place. And one of the things I explained was that, as long as you're only criticizing the father, and it seems to make sense, and that all fingers point to him. But when you actually take time to look at the women that participate in this dynamic, it opens up a whole new door of operation. Meaning, you have, and this goes back to my whole analysis on husband sons, right? These are accessible men who can be controlled by women who are often who want to be in positions of authority in a relationship. They want to dictate the terms of the relationship, and that includes reproduction, marriage, so on and so forth. He may not be as desirable in terms of the man she ultimately wants, but he's accessible. He's controllable, and she can deal with him even though he's not her ideal. Right? But this article, what it's also pointing to is the impact this has on children, especially in terms of calibration and regulation. Right? So what happens when she decides to have a child from a man she knows isn't going to be present? Whether she hits enough child support on the back end is a whole other issue. But she knowingly goes into the dynamic simply because she wants to reproduce, and in some instances doesn't want to be bothered with having to negotiate that relationship with a man. I told you guys last year, I had a conversation with my mother, and the conversation got so comfortable, she forgot who she was talking to. And when she was talking about young women having kids, she started to kind of pantomime the conversation she would have with young women. She was doing it with me. And she said, because, she was talking about marriage and children. She said, you may not want to get married. You just may want a child. And you don't want to have to negotiate with that nigga about. And she called herself.
Alexa.
She said, oh,
Alexa.
Well, that's, of course, if he abuses you. First of all, abuse had nothing to do with our conversation. That was an out. What we were talking about was young women, reproduction, and their accountability to men in relationships, about how they present themselves, how they carry themselves. What she got caught into, when she forgot who she was talking to, was what she would normally tell women, which is, he doesn't matter. You may just want to have a child on your own, and you don't want to have to negotiate what happens with that child in relation to that man, because he would have a say in what happens. But the darker side, I shouldn't say darker, but the other side to this dynamic is what this article is pointing out. Without that father presence, you do have issues with calibration and regulation as it relates to the kids. The kids don't learn how to calibrate because they only learn from one parent. And if that parent is somewhat a control, I won't say a control freak, but requires to be in control, especially if she's chosen to reproduce without men intentionally for the purpose of not having to negotiate power in terms of rearing those children, calibration can become an issue. So this article is already kind of taking some important turns. Anyway, let's continue. Working individually with the mothers and the boys, I was able to help them begin to recognize and then change their relationship. Speaking for nearly all such cases, one boy said, I can see now that being in class felt so claustrophobic. It was my only space away from mom, and I filled it with the feeling of needing to be free of her. I couldn't concentrate, I couldn't organize myself, I was disruptive to others. Now, this is interesting, right? You're going to see a similar pattern in some of the other areas here. So then you have self-harm, right? The need for escape implied in the previous quotation features, in all three referral types. Self-harm is usually seen by mental health professionals as a cry to release feelings that cannot be expressed verbally or through other means. This is as true of those who cut themselves as it is for those who poison themselves, often through overdoses. When there's only the mother to confide in, and if and when this relationship is felt to be the cause of the feelings that become unbearable to the young person, then self-harm can provide an escape route for feelings. My work with one young boy ended with him recognizing that I had provided a mental space, this is key, a mental space away from his relationship with his mother. He memorably told me, realize no, I'm tripping today. I realize now that I needed dad to have been at home, giving me a different person like you have to feel things with instead of mom and all her issues. In other words, the father forms another paradigm. Now, there's another paradigm that's present that the child can access when, trying to shape their personality. Children try on different personalities like clothes when they're trying to establish who they are. But if they have limited options, that hampers things. Now, my generation, a lot of what we did, particularly if you talk about black men in the hip hop generation, we eventually turned to other young men, but we also pulled from media. We pulled bits and pieces. The problem with that is you don't get a full dimensional view of another person as a model for what kind of personality you might want to inherit traits from. You just get bits and pieces that are very selectively shown on screen. And that's kind of the thing. As a matter of fact, I have an assignment in my black male class where they have to do what I call a media map, where they have to show me the various maps of images of black men that help frame their understanding of black manhood. Right? And it's interesting to watch because you have bits and pieces, and I've done this myself. There's a little bit of Richard Pryor, a little bit of Bill Cosby, there's a little bit of a thousand other media characters that I pulled from, but they are all shards. They're all small little breakages in a mirror that don't allow you the full access to being able to see a person around the clock and get to see how they respond to different stimuli. Right? And that's what the value of having parents in the home. But when you eliminate the father, then turn around and blame him for his absence, which we'll get to in a minute, it has an impact on kids that nobody wants to talk about. So this kid here is telling his therapist that at least the therapist provided a new space. But that only lasts as long as the therapy does. And you can go right back to being frustrated without that constant access. The third type of referral the psychotherapist talks about is the predatory sexual behavior. In no way am I reducing the seriousness of predatory behavior for the perpetrator and certainly not for the victim when I say the mother with issues played a very large part in the actions of the boys I saw. While some fathers are violent and eventually leave or are required by law to leave the family home, it is also the case that some mothers push out nonviolent partners because they do not fit with the historical script of these mothers. Many mothers I saw had serious issues with men. Some had been abused by their own fathers or grandfathers. Having sons prevented them with a problem. Now notice how he takes this particular interpretation, but there's an absence of what men experience. There's an absence of empathy in some respects to these fathers. But I digress. Having sons presented them with a problem. How were they to live with a man in the house once they had expelled the boy's father? Excuse me, with a male in the house once they had expelled the boy's father, but then lived with their memories of being abused by their own fathers. Some mothers pulled their sons close to them, saying that they were the pride and joy, that they were their pride and joy, whilst in the next breath saying they were just like whoever had abused them. Right? And we've seen this in the black community, and it's colloquially talked about even online as, you look just like your damn father. So there's both a love hate relationship there for a child or son that has nothing to do with his parentage. And so, you have this simultaneous venting of love and hate, right? And this goes back to calibration and scale in many respects. Without that father's presence, all of that venom and honey thrown at a child at the same time with no scaling, with no check and balance, with no one else in the household that can provide that child relief means a constant stream of extremes back and forth, right? And what does that do to a child? Anyway, the claustrophobia released by self harm for other boys was, for these boys, only released by behaving in the intrusive way that these mothers had been at the receiving end of with their own fathers. So disturbing was the relationship with their mothers, so non existent were the opportunities to find another escape route that these boys repeated the offenses already a feature in their families. So, in brief, the absence of the father can have profound consequences on both mother and son. There are a great many young boys and, without doubt, young girls with absent fathers who would benefit from an approach to their mental health that takes into account his role and the consequences of his absence. He doesn't talk about why fathers are absent. And usually, the going, notion, especially in the black community, is that fathers are absent because they're trifling, they're deadbeats, especially if they're black. Nobody wants to talk about women having the institutional means to expel him or to make the environment so hostile to him that him leaving on his own looks like his own idea. Men, are constantly assessing risk. They're constantly checking back and forth with sacrifice and risk and measuring what it's worth. And there are many men who have been pushed out of families by women who use the institutional access they had to control the environment without his say. And that way, it provided them plausible deniability when he decides to leave in response to that controlling environment. Because she doesn't have to tell anybody what she did. It's not readily seen. He's not physically assaulted unless he is. But even then, that's not really regarded seriously. So a lot of people in the 70s and 80s, when they started to talk about this deadbeat dad thing in the community, they did not always mention what actually took place and what pushed many men out of the space. And many of those men either went to seek out creating new families or went monk. Nobody talks about why. So we're stuck with the deadbeat narrative, and that's the going interpretation of how men leave families and why, especially in the black community. But this last sentence of the previous paragraph was interesting to me. So disturbing was the relationship with their mothers, so non existent were the opportunities to find another escape route. But these boys repeated the offenses already a feature of their families. Notice he didn't talk about boys who were sexually violated within the homes that he's talking about. Hmm? Teachers, babysitters, even mothers who sexually violate their boys. We're going to continue to act like this doesn't exist, nor are we going to acknowledge the impact it has on these boys themselves. But I couple this particular piece, which is again a reflection on how the absence of fathers impacts boys, and I think there's still a lot to be said here. I think this author dodges accountability a bit when it comes to mother. And I think we do that shit a lot in the academy and in public. We have no problem blaming boys and men, but we really do sidestep full accountability for mothers. And so when you point out that full accountability, you look like you hate women. But really, you're trying to balance something that has been so imbalanced that imbalance is considered normal. To balance it looks like an attack on women, but it's not, and it doesn't have to be. You're just acknowledging something that has not been acknowledged for so long. But it's interesting to watch how people take that as an attack on women. And you have all kind of people coming out the woodwork to protect women from that amount of accountability. And that's just enough to balance the scale so we can actually look at a situation with some degree of objectivity and clarity with all of the facts. But we've grown comfortable with ignoring men's experiences in these dynamics because it makes women uncomfortable, because it makes feminists uncomfortable, and it holds women accountable for their behavior. Let's look at an accompanying article I want to add to this. This is a piece by Josh Leves. I think that's how you pronounce his name. This is on Newsweek. It came out June 5th, 2020. And he says, they're dragging out the absent black father's myth again. Can we give it a rest? Okay? And now the reason I'm talking about this article is I found it interesting when you juxtapose the two next to each other, right? First article having to do with the impact on sons when the father is absent. And then in the black community, this doubling down on the deadbeat father, absent black father narrative. And what do the two articles or the two issues that the articles refer to really do in the black community, most especially? Well, usually what it means is that we falsely blame the fathers and we ignore the seriousness of what happens to the boys. And we don't seem to care. And we, I mean, as a society. So he says, as protests fill streets across the U.S., some people looking to deny systemic racism are resurfacing a false, pernicious myth, one that places blame for the biggest problems facing the black community on black men. It's the myth that most black dads are absent from their children's lives. Perhaps most prominently, the focus on allegedly absent black fathers was propped up again this week by right-wing PragerU and a video by radio host Larry Elder, who did what so many other people who believe this myth do: conflate marriage statistics and fatherlessness. Right? In writing my book All In, I looked into a wide range of statistics about fatherhood and explored the methodologies behind them to see whether they were presenting an accurate picture. Unfortunately, all sorts of statistics about fathers that are often cited by people across the political spectrum are false. When it comes to black dads specifically, most in fact live with their children. CDC study found that 2.5 million black fathers were living with their children, and about 1.7 million were officially living apart from them. Right? Counting by, so that means obviously there are more fathers living with their children than not, black fathers. Counting by the number of children rather than the number of fathers presents a different picture. The Census Bureau reports that slightly more than half of black children live in homes headed by one parent, which is usually, but not always, the mother. This is explained in part by non co-residential fathers having more children. It's also true that black children are more likely than others to be born out of wedlock. But neither of these things make children fatherless. Millions of kids live with their fathers half the time, or at least part of the time, through joint custody arrangements. But children generally have one legal address, which is particularly important for purposes of determining school districts. Most often, the legal address is the mother's. This is a major reason that fatherlessness statistics in general are overblown. Fathers' homes are all too often are not counted officially as being homes with children. Also, some unmarried couples live together, making the marriage statistics even more misleading. Meanwhile, among fathers who live with their children, black dads are in many ways the most involved in their kids' lives. Black fathers, 70%, were more likely to have bathed, dressed, diapered, or helped their children use the toilet every day compared with 60% of white and 45% of Hispanic fathers, the CDC study found. Also, more black fathers than white fathers took their children to or from activities every day and helped their kids with homework every day. The lead researcher told me this study marked the debunking of the black fathers being absent myth. Fatherlessness can mean different things to different people. At what point is a child fatherless? Seeing dad only once a month? Never. Some kids who live with their fathers sometimes feel fatherless. Still, given that many kids who live separately from their fathers don't see them, or at least don't see them often, statistically, fatherlessness is more common among African American families than among others. But that brings us to a second problem with trying to bring up fatherlessness now amid protests. Broken families are an inevitable consequence of the exact kinds of problems protesters are currently standing up against. Innocent black men who were killed by police obviously won't be there for their families. If you care about black children being fatherless, you should be supporting the protesters. He goes on in regard to George Floyd. Black people are also more likely to be charged, tried, convicted, and sent to jail for all sorts of crimes than whites, which again pulls fathers away from their children. And even in the prison complex, people are striving to be there for their children, even from behind bars. While writing All In, I spent time in prison interviewing men who were enrolled in a fatherhood program. So this particular piece attempts to debunk some of the statistics around fatherlessness and what that actually looks like. And yet again reaffirms that black men have a presence that again is downplayed and disregarded. But again, when accompanying this with the other article, you can see that the impact mainly falls boys. And how much of that we care about is a whole nother matter. Either way, hopefully this information was useful. Curious to hear your thoughts about it. Hit me up in the comments. Appreciate your support. Hope you guys have a good one. Peace.
All right, I thought that was another good episode there. I touched on that before. Let me just go back to this last part. I think that's important that we just listen to that piece again. Just really short here, and it's part of the smallest part of this article here.
Not counted officially as being homes with children. Also, some unmarried couples live together, making the marriage statistics even more misleading.
So what he's reading here is defining what is fatherlessness, right? How do you define that? Which is important. Would someone who is submariner, is that a fatherless home because he's gone 3 months out of the 3 months in, 3 months out? Is it a fatherless home if he's on Westpac for a year and a half or for 2 years? So that's a good question.
Among fathers who live with their children, Black dads are in many ways the most involved in their kids' lives. Black fathers, 70%, were more likely to have bathed, dressed, diapered, or helped their children use the toilet every day compared with 60% of white and 45% of Hispanic fathers, the CDC.
So this is from the CDC. This is a study from the CDC. So Black fathers at 70% were most likely to have bathed, dressed, diapered, or helped their children use the toilet every day compared to 60% of white fathers and 45% of Hispanic fathers. And for many of you, that's probably the first time you're hearing such a stat, right? I know I did that. But we are vilified and demonized as deadbeat absentee fathers, right? Because 80% of children born in the Black community are born to single mothers. Almost 80. Also, more Black fathers than white fathers took their children to or from activities every day and helped their kids with homework every day.
Study found. Also, more Black fathers than white fathers took their children to or from activities every day.
Whoops, I didn't mean to do that.
Black dads are in many ways the most involved in their kids' lives. Black fathers, 70%, were more likely to have bathed, dressed, diapered, or helped their children use the toilet every day compared with 60% of white and 45% of Hispanic fathers, the CDC study found. Also, more Black fathers than white fathers took.
And, there are people that will question statistics or where those things came from. Where does blackdemographics.com get their information from? You can check where you can see their information. Most people will more trust the CDC or BLS or some of the other government websites. But even then, you need to make sure that you look at everything carefully.
Their children to or from activities every day and help their kids with homework every day. The lead researcher told me this study marked the debunking of the Black fathers being absent myth. Fatherlessness can mean different things to different people. At what point is a child fatherless? Seeing dad only once a month? Never. Some kids who live with their fathers sometimes feel fatherless. Still, given that many kids who live separately from their fathers don't see them, or at least don't see them often, statistically, fatherlessness is more common among African American families than among others. But that brings us to a second problem with trying to bring up fatherlessness now amid protests. Broken families are an inevitable consequence of the exact kinds of problems protesters are currently standing up against. Innocent Black men who were killed by police obviously won't be there for their families. If you care about Black children being fatherless, you should be supporting the protesters. It goes on. Floyd. Black people are also more likely to be charged, tried, convicted, and sent to jail for all sorts of crimes than whites, which again pulls fathers away from their children. And even in the prison complex, people are striving to be there for their children, even from behind bars. While writing All In, I spent time in prison interviewing men who were enrolled in a fatherhood program.
So again, I hope that this is a helpful, different perspective for you, for us, to be exposed to analyze, to be thoughtful about, and hopefully engage conversation. Unfortunately, these are some of the lowest viewed videos, as this doesn't resonate. Now, if I talk about some kind of shenanigans or drama, um, or something like that, well, we'll go ahead and tune into that in larger numbers, and that's unfortunate. But again, it doesn't mean that we don't share this information, because if we don't, who will? And so I am definitely that. I will, and I am. So again, the chili is looking good. I had a sample of the chili. Tastes pretty good, for a vegan chili with no meat in it. Uh, Definitely love seeing all those colors and the different vegetables in there. So, and it was a pretty easy recipe. Like I just Googled something and just tried it. And this is, my dad would call it goulash, right? Just the stuff that you got in your cabinets that's left over, and he would throw all kinds of stuff in there. My dad, he made a dish called puka, and it sounds disgusting. And what it is he would pan fry tuna fish with eggs and cheese. And when he first made it, it's like, Dad, why are you doing this to us? You're a little kid. You're like, I don't want that. You're ready to cry. You don't want to eat this. But man, the puka was the bomb. So I don't know if you've ever had, tuna fish and fried eggs and cheese. Oh man, that's the bomb diggy. I haven't had that in probably, man, maybe 20 years. So I might need to make some puka just for old time's sake. So anyway, put your favorite father recipes in the chat, and we will see you tomorrow at the Pancake Breakfast again, 4040 Wheaton Way. Suite 203, 11 a.m. We'll be there from about 11 to 2 or so. Come by, share your programs, come fellowship, eat some food, bring some people with you. If folks need a meal, that's a great time to do it. We'll be handing out 25 meals to Jocelyn and her team tomorrow to feed those that are on the street. So again, making those missions, everyone's mission happen, and trying to serve the community. And then again, Thursday, we have our community barbecue at Viewcrest Village that starts at 4 p.m. If you want to come help volunteer, we're probably going to be feeding upwards of 1,000 people. So come on down for that. And so glad that we're going to have good weather for it. We also have our new show with Jeff Campbell in the evening. So we'll be broadcasting the Bremerton City Council meeting, and then he and I will have a conversation after. So tune in for that. I actually have to create that show because I haven't done that yet and sent him the link. But we've been talking offline, and so he's pretty excited about the next show. He's doing a little bit of research and getting some stuff together. So super excited for that. Anyway, I got music now. I guess I should play it, right? All right, y'all. I am Marwan Cameron. This is The Conduit. We'll see you tomorrow, unless somehow I end up doing another show today, because, hey, I'm blessed and highly favored. All right, I hope you are too.